File 21.
Chapter 11. For once, I was the hero. Lord John Roxton was right when he thought that some specially toxic quality might lie in the bite of the horrible creatures which had attacked us. On the morning after our first adventure upon the plateau, both Summerlee and I were in great pain and fever, while Challenger's knee was so bruised that he could hardly limp. We kept to our camp all day, therefore, Lord John busying himself with such help as we could give him, in raising the height and thickness of the thorny walls which were our only defence. I remember that during the whole long day I was haunted by the feeling that we were closely observed, though by whom or whence I could give no guess. So strong was the impression that I told Professor Challenger of it, who put it down to the cerebral excitement caused by my fever. Again and again I glanced round swiftly, with the conviction that I was about to see something, but only to meet the dark tangle of our hedge, or the solemn and cavernous gloom of the great trees which arched above our heads. And yet the feeling grew ever stronger in my own mind that something observant and something malevolent was at our very elbow. I thought of the Indian superstition of the Kurupuri, the dreadful lurking spirit of the woods, and I could have imagined that this terrible presence haunted those who have invaded his most remote and sacred retreat. That night, our third in Maple White Land, we had an experience which left a fearful impression on our minds, and made us thankful that Lord John had worked so hard in making our retreat impregnable. We were all sleeping round our dying fire, when we were aroused, or rather, I should say, shot out of our slumbers, by a succession of the most frightful cries and screams to which I have ever listened. I know no sound to which I could compare this amazing tumult, which seemed to come from some spot within a few hundred yards of our camp. It was as ear-splitting as any whistle of a railway engine, but whereas the whistle is a clear, mechanical, sharp-edged sound, this was far deeper in volume and vibrant with the uttermost strain of agony and horror. We clapped our hands to our ears to shut out that nerve-shaking appeal. A cold sweat broke out over my body, and my heart turned sick at the misery of it. All the woes of our tortured life, all its stupendous indictment of high heaven, its innumerable sorrows, seemed to be centred and condensed into one dreadful, agonized cry. And then, under this high-pitched ringing sound, there was another, more intermittent, a low, deep-chested laugh, a growling, throaty gurgle of merriment, which formed a grotesque accompaniment to the shriek from which it was blended. For 3 or 4 minutes on end the fearsome duet continued, while all the foliage rustled with the rising of startled birds. Then it shut off as suddenly as it began. For a long time we sat in horrified silence. Then Lord John threw a bundle of twigs upon the fire, and their red glare lit up the intent faces of my companions, and flickered over the great boughs above our heads. "What was it?" I whispered. "We shall know in the morning," said Lord John. "It was close to us, not farther than the glade." "We have been privileged to overhear a prehistoric tragedy, the sort of drama which occurred among the reeds upon the border of some Jurassic lagoon, when the greater dragon pinned the lesser among the slime," said Challenger, with more solemnity than I had ever heard in his voice. "It was surely well for man that he came late in the order of creation. There were powers abroad in earlier days which no courage and no mechanism of his could have met. What could his sling, his throwing-stick, or his arrow avail him against such forces as have been loosed tonight? Even with a modern rifle it would be all odds on the monster." "I think I should back my little friend," said Lord John, caressing his Express, "but the beast would certainly have a good sporting chance." Summerlee raised his hand. "Hush!" he cried. "Surely I hear something." From the utter silence there emerged a deep, regular pat, pat. It was the tread of some animal, the rhythm of soft but heavy pads placed cautiously upon the ground. It stole slowly round the camp, and then halted near our gateway. There was a low, sibilant rise and fall, the breathing of the creature. Only our feeble hedge separated us from this horror of the night. Each of us had seized his rifle, and Lord John had pulled out a small bush to make an embrasure in the hedge. "By George," he whispered, "I think I can see it." I stooped and peered over his shoulder through the gap. Yes, I could see it too. In the deep shadow of the tree there was a deeper shadow yet, black, inchoate, vague, a crouching form full of savage vigour and menace. It was no higher than a horse, but the dim outline suggested vast bulk and strength. That hissing pant, as regular and full-volumed as the exhaust of an engine, spoke of a monstrous organism. Once, as it moved, I thought I saw the glint of two terrible greenish eyes. There was an uneasy rustling, as if it were crawling slowly forward. "I believe it's going to spring," said I, cocking my rifle. "Don't fire! Don't fire!" whispered Lord John. "The crash of a gun in this silent night would be heard for miles. Keep it as a last card." "If it gets over the hedge, we're done," said Summerlee, and his voice crackled into a nervous laugh as he spoke. No, it must not get over," cried Lord John. "But hold your fire to the last. Perhaps I can make something of the fella. I'll chance it, anyhow." It was as brave an act as ever I saw a man do. He stooped to the fire, picked up a blazing branch, and slipped in an instant through a sallyport which he had made in our gateway. The thing moved forward with a dreadful snarl. Lord John never hesitated, but running towards it with a quick, light step, he dashed the flaming wood into the brute's face. For one moment I had a vision of a horrible mask like a giant toad's, of a warty, leprous skin, and of a loose mouth all beslobbered with fresh blood. The next, there was a crash in the underwood, and our dreadful visitor was gone. "I thought he wouldn't face the fire," said Lord John, laughing, as he came back and threw his branch among the faggots. "You should not have taken such a risk," we all cried. "Well, there was nothing else to be done. If he'd got amongst us, we should have shot each other in trying to down him. On the other hand, if we had fired through the hedge and wounded him, he would soon have been on top of us, to say nothing of giving ourselves away. On the whole, I think we're jolly well out of it. What was he, then?" Our learned men looked at each other with some hesitation. Personally, I am unable to classify the creature with any certainty," said Summerlee, lighting his pipe from the fire.
"When refusing to commit yourself, you are but showing a proper scientific reserve,"
said Challenger, with massive condescension.
"I am not myself prepared to go further than to say in general terms that we have almost certainly been in contact tonight with some form of carnivorous dinosaur. I've already expressed my anticipation that something of the sort might exist upon this plateau."
"We have to bear in mind," remarked Summerlee, "that there are many prehistoric forms which have never come down to us. It would be rash to suppose that we can give a name to all that we seem likely to meet."
"Exactly. A rough classification may be the best that we can attempt. Tomorrow some further evidence may help us to identification. Meantime, we can only renew our interrupted slumbers."
"But not without a sentinel," said Lord John with decision.
"We can't afford to take chances in a country like this. 2-hour spells in the future for each of us."
"Then I'll just finish my pipe in starting the first one," said Professor Summerlee. And from that time onwards we never trusted ourselves again without a watchman. In the morning, it was not long before we discovered the source of the hideous uproar which had aroused us in the night. The Iguanodon glade was the scene of a horrible butchery. From the pools of blood and the enormous lumps of flesh scattered in every direction over the green sward, we imagined at first that a number of animals had been killed. But on examining the remains more closely, we discovered that all this carnage came from one of these unwieldy monsters, which had been literally torn to pieces by some creature, not larger perhaps, but far more ferocious than itself. Our 2 professors sat in absorbed argument, examining piece after piece, which showed the marks of savage teeth and of enormous claws.
"Our judgment must still be in abeyance,"
said Professor Challenger, with a huge slab of whitish-coloured flesh across his knee.
"The indications would be consistent with the presence of a saber-toothed tiger, such as are still found amongst the breccia of our caverns. But the creature actually seen was undoubtedly of a larger and more reptilian character. Personally, I should pronounce for Allosaurus."
"Or Megalosaurus," said Summerlee.
"Exactly. Any one of the larger carnivorous dinosaurs would meet the case. Among them are to be found all the most terrible types of animal life that have ever cursed the earth, or blessed a museum."
He laughed sonorously at his own conceit, for though he had little sense of humour, the crudest pleasantry from his own lips moved him always to roars of appreciation.
"Well, the less noise, the better," said Lord John curtly. "We don't know who or what may be near us. If this fellow comes back for his breakfast and catches us here, we won't have so much to laugh at. By the way, what's this mark upon the iguanodon's hide?"
On the dull, scaly, slate-coloured skin, somewhere above the shoulder, there was a singular black circle of some substance, which looked like asphalt. None of us could suggest what it meant, though Summerlee was of the opinion that he'd seen something similar upon one of the young ones 2 days before. Challenger said nothing, but looked pompous and puffy, as if he could if he would, so that finally Lord John asked his opinion direct.
"If your lordship will greatly permit me to open my mouth, I shall be happy to express my sentiments,"
said he with elaborate sarcasm.
"I am not in the habit of being taken to task in the fashion which seems to be customary with your lordship. I was not aware that it was necessary to ask your permission before smiling at a